Please rise! The bailiff's voice cracked through the tense courtroom, a stark command that everyone obeyed, eyes fixed on Judge Eleanor Vance as she swept in, her face a mask of stern neutrality. But today, her usual calm was a fragile veneer. Today was about Jamal, a 16-year-old black kid from the East Side, whose future dangled by a thread, caught in the unforgiving machinery of the justice system. The prosecutor, a man whose ambition was as sharp as his tailored suit, began his closing arguments, painting Jamal as a menace, a repeat offender despite the flimsy evidence. Jamal, in his ill-fitting suit, watched, his young face etched with a mix of fear and a defiant flicker. This wasn't just a trial. It was a public spectacle, a social media storm brewing outside, ready to erupt. The air in courtroom 3B of the Metropolitan Superior Court was thick with unspoken judgments and the faint, metallic scent of old justice. Every creak of the wooden benches, every rustle of paper seemed amplified, echoing the frantic thrumming in Jamal's chest. He sat beside Ms. Anya Sharma, his public defender, a woman whose idealism was constantly battling the crushing weight of underfunded resources and systemic apathy. She was good, Jamal knew, but even her impassioned arguments felt like whispers against the roar of public opinion already condemning him. The prosecutor, Mr. Harrison Thorne, a man whose silver hair and booming voice commanded attention, leaned into the microphone, his gaze sweeping across the jury box. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice a perfectly modulated instrument of conviction, "we are not here today to debate the intentions of a misguided youth. We are here to protect our community, to ensure that the streets of our beloved Northwood remain safe from those who would disrupt its peace, who would prey upon its citizens." Jamal felt a familiar knot tighten in his stomach. Prey upon its citizens. It was always the same narrative, always painting him and kids like him as threats, as inherently criminal. The alleged crime? Aggravated assault and robbery. The victim? Mr. Arthur Jenkins, a prominent real estate developer, found bruised and disoriented in an alleyway behind his upscale downtown office. The evidence? A blurry surveillance photo showing a figure in a dark hoodie, similar in build to Jamal, and the fact that Jamal had been in the vicinity on his way home from his part-time job at the local community center. No fingerprints, no weapon, no eyewitness identification beyond Jenkins's shaky recollection under duress. "My client," Ms. Sharma countered in her closing, her voice calm but firm, "is a scholar, a volunteer, a young man with a promising future. He was walking home, as he does every night. He works at the community center, tutoring younger children, cleaning up the park. These are not the actions of a violent criminal." She gestured towards Jamal, who tried to meet her gaze, to project an image of innocence. But inside, a cold dread was setting in. He had seen enough of these trials. He knew how it often ended for boys who looked like him. The digital world, meanwhile, was a chaotic echo chamber of the courtroom drama. Justice for Jenkins trended on Twitter, fueled by local news outlets, many of whom had already published articles implying Jamal's guilt. Screenshots of his past minor infractions, a schoolyard fight, a truancy charge, were circulated, taken out of context, twisted into a narrative of escalating criminality. "Another one," someone tweeted. "These kids think they can get away with anything." A counter-narrative, Free Jamal, was slowly gaining traction, championed by local activists and community leaders who knew Jamal personally, but their voices were often drowned out by the louder, more sensational accusations. Jamal's mother, Patricia, sat in the gallery, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. Her eyes, usually so full of warmth and laughter, were now shadowed with a profound weariness, a fear for her only son. She had worked 2 jobs her entire life to give Jamal a chance, to keep him out of trouble, to build a future better than her own. Now, it felt like it was all unraveling, pulled apart by a system that seemed predetermined to fail him. Judge Vance watched the proceedings with an almost unsettling stillness. Her reputation was that of an unyielding, by-the-book jurist, rarely swayed by emotional appeals, always adhering to the letter of the law. Yet Jamal had caught her gaze a few times, a fleeting moment where he thought he saw something in her eyes. Not sympathy, perhaps, but a deep, analytical observation, as if she were dissecting every word, every gesture, searching for a truth hidden beneath the layers of legal rhetoric. The jury was sent to deliberate. The waiting began. It was a torturous limbo, a period where time stretched and warped. Jamal leaned back, trying to breathe, trying to steady his racing heart. He thought of his dreams. College, a degree in engineering, building something, creating. He thought of his little sister, Maya, who looked up to him, who believed he could do anything. He couldn't let them down. He wouldn't. But the gnawing fear whispered otherwise. Hours later, the bailiff's voice boomed again. "All rise! The jury has reached a verdict." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Patricia clutched her chest. Ms. Sharma placed a reassuring hand on Jamal's arm, but her own face was tense. Jamal felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. This was it. The moment that would define his life, for better or worse. The jury foreman, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, handed the verdict slip to the bailiff, who in turn passed it to Judge Vance. The judge's eyes scanned the paper, her expression unreadable. The silence in the room was absolute, a heavy, suffocating blanket. Every single person in that courtroom held their breath, waiting for the words that would seal Jamal's fate. Judge Vance cleared her throat, the small sound echoing loudly in the hushed courtroom. Her gaze, usually impassive, seemed to linger on Jamal for a fraction of a second, a fleeting moment he couldn't decipher. Then, her voice, clear and resonant, cut through the tension. In the matter of the state versus Jamal Thompson, on the charge of aggravated assault and robbery, we have a verdict. The words hung in the air, a precipice from which Jamal felt he was about to be pushed. He braced himself, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on the judge, trying to read the unreadable. "We, the jury, find the defendant guilty." The word guilty struck Jamal like a physical blow. The air rushed out of his lungs. He heard a strangled cry from his mother in the gallery, a sound that tore at his soul. Ms. Sharma squeezed his arm, a gesture of comfort that felt utterly inadequate. The prosecutor, Mr. Thorne, allowed himself a small, satisfied nod. A ripple of murmurs spread through the public gallery, quickly shushed by the bailiff. Jamal felt a sickening lurch in his stomach. Guilty. It wasn't just a word. It was a brand, a condemnation. His dreams of college, of a future, seemed to shatter into a million irreparable pieces. The world outside the courtroom, the world that had already judged him, now had its confirmation. The social media storm, which had been simmering, erupted. "Justice served," one tweet crowed. "Another thug off the streets," read another, instantly retweeted hundreds of times. The hashtag #JusticeForJenkins surged, completely eclipsing Free Jamal. "Order! Order in the court!" Judge Vance commanded, her gavel striking the bench with a sharp crack that momentarily silenced the rising unrest. "The jury has rendered its verdict. We will now proceed to sentencing on date, time." Jamal was numb as the proceedings concluded. He barely registered Ms. Sharma's whispered apologies and reassurances. His mother rushed towards him, her face streaked with tears, but a deputy gently intercepted her, reminding her of the rules. Their hands briefly touched, a fleeting connection that conveyed a universe of sorrow and despair. Back in his holding cell, the stark reality of his situation crashed down on him. He wasn't just guilty, he was done. A felony conviction. A prison sentence. His life, as he knew it, was over. He thought of Maya, her bright, innocent face, and a wave of shame washed over him. How could he face her? How could he ever explain this? The next few days were a blur of legal discussions and the oppressive weight of his impending sentencing. Ms. Sharma explained the appeals process, the slim chances, the harsh realities. She talked about mitigating factors, about character witnesses. But Jamal felt a profound sense of hopelessness. The system had spoken. Meanwhile, Mr. Arthur Jenkins, the victim, emerged from the trial victorious, basking in the glow of public sympathy. He gave interviews, portraying himself as a brave citizen who had endured a traumatic ordeal. He spoke of the need for tough-on-crime measures, subtly reinforcing the narrative that Jamal was a dangerous criminal. His real estate company, Jenkins and Associates, even saw a surge in positive publicity, capitalizing on the perceived victory for public safety. But the ripple effects weren't all predictable. In the East Side community, Jamal's conviction sparked outrage. Pastor Elias Thorne, a respected community leader and no relation to the prosecutor, organized a peaceful protest outside the courthouse. "This isn't justice," he declared to a small but fervent crowd. "This is a miscarriage of justice. Jamal Thompson is a good kid, and he's being made an example of." Local activists, including a grassroots organization called Voices for Justice, began digging deeper, scrutinizing the evidence, or lack thereof, against Jamal. They highlighted inconsistencies, like the fact that the blurry surveillance image was the only link, and that Jenkins's initial description of his assailant had been vague and contradictory. Social media, while largely hostile, also began to show cracks in the consensus. Some users started questioning the rush to judgment, the lack of concrete evidence. Screenshots of Jenkins's past business dealings, some of which were ethically questionable, began to circulate. Is Jenkins really the victim here? Or is there more to the story? One user tweeted, attaching links to old news articles about Jenkins's aggressive acquisition tactics. The conversation was shifting, ever so slightly, from absolute condemnation to a nascent skepticism. Days turned into a week. The date of sentencing loomed. Jamal's mother, Patricia, refused to give up. She spent every waking hour making calls, reaching out to anyone who would listen, compiling letters of support from teachers, mentors, and community members. She even tried to get a meeting with Judge Vance's chambers, but was politely, yet firmly, denied. On the morning of the sentencing, the courtroom was even more packed than it had been for the verdict. News cameras lined the streets outside. The tension was palpable. Judge Vance entered, her face as inscrutable as ever, but something about her demeanor seemed different. A quiet intensity, a focused gravity. Jamal, escorted by a deputy, walked to the defense table, his head held high despite the churning fear in his gut. He looked at his mother, offering a weak smile. He wasn't going to break, not now, not in front of them. Mr. Thorne began his arguments for a harsh sentence, emphasizing the severity of the crime and the need to send a strong message. Ms. Sharma countered with pleas for leniency, detailing Jamal's exemplary character, his potential, his youth. She presented the letters of support, painting a picture of a life worth saving. Then, it was Judge Vance's turn. She sat back, her gaze sweeping the courtroom, from the prosecutor to Ms. Sharma, to the rows of eager journalists to Jamal himself. She took a deep breath. "Mr. Thompson," she began, her voice resonating with an unexpected depth. "The court has heard the arguments for sentencing. The jury has delivered its verdict." Jamal braced himself. This was it, the final blow. But then, Judge Vance did something extraordinary, something that silenced the entire court. She didn't immediately deliver the sentence. Instead, she leaned forward, her eyes locking with Jamal's. "Mr. Thompson," she repeated, her voice softer now, yet carrying immense weight. "I have reviewed every shred of evidence in this case, every testimony, every exhibit, and I have spent many sleepless nights grappling with what I have found." The room was utterly silent. You could hear a pin drop. Everyone exchanged confused glances. This was not typical Judge Vance. This was not typical procedure. Something was happening. Something unexpected. A profound hush fell over courtroom 3B, heavier than any silence Jamal had ever experienced. Judge Vance's words, "grappling with what I have found," hung in the air, a cryptic preamble that sent a jolt of bewilderment through everyone present. Mr. Thorne, the prosecutor, shifted uncomfortably, a flicker of irritation crossing his face. Ms. Sharma, however, straightened, a glimmer of hope, however faint, appearing in her tired eyes. Judge Vance continued, her voice gaining a deliberate, almost academic tone. The jury, in its due diligence, relied on the evidence presented to it within the confines of this courtroom, and based on that evidence, a verdict was reached. However, she paused, her gaze now sweeping across the public gallery. A judge's responsibility extends beyond merely rubber-stamping a jury's decision. It encompasses ensuring that justice, in its purest form, is served, even when the path to that justice is unconventional. Her words were met with confused whispers. A few reporters quickly began typing on their laptops, their faces a mixture of intrigue and disbelief. What was she doing? Over the past week following the verdict, Judge Vance stated, her eyes returning to Jamal, I initiated a private and independent review of certain aspects of this case. Not to overturn a jury's findings lightly, but to satisfy a growing disquiet in my own legal conscience. Mr. Thorne finally spoke, his voice tinged with incredulity. Your Honor, with all due respect, this is highly irregular. The court cannot engage in its own private investigation after a verdict has been rendered. Judge Vance held up a hand, a gesture that immediately silenced him. Mr. Thorne, this court is always within its rights to ensure due process and to prevent a miscarriage of justice. My review focused not on new evidence, but on a critical re-evaluation of the context surrounding the existing evidence, particularly the foundational pillar of the prosecution's case, the testimony of Mr. Arthur Jenkins. A palpable shift occurred in the courtroom. Everyone leaned forward. Jenkins, who was seated smugly in the front row, suddenly looked less composed, a flicker of unease crossing his face. Specifically, Judge Vance continued, I revisited the initial police report, which documented Mr. Jenkins's varying accounts of the assault. His initial description of his assailant was remarkably vague. A young black male, dark clothing. Subsequent interviews, however, became more specific, aligning suspiciously well with Mr. Thompson's known attire and build. She paused, letting the implication hang. This alone is not damning. Memory can be fallible under duress. However, my concerns deepened when I correlated this with public information that has recently surfaced on social media, information which, while not presented in this courtroom, casts a significant shadow on Mr. Jenkins's credibility. She gestured to a court clerk. I instruct the clerk to display Exhibit D1, which I have added to the court record. On the large monitor typically used for presenting digital evidence, an old newspaper clipping appeared. The headline read, Jenkins Development Faces Lawsuit Over Disputed Land Sale. Below it was a picture of a younger Arthur Jenkins, looking noticeably less polished. This exhibit, Judge Vance explained, her voice gaining a steely edge, is a 2008 article detailing a civil lawsuit against Mr. Jenkins for predatory business practices, specifically coercing an elderly homeowner into selling her property for well below market value. The case was settled out of court with a strict non-disclosure agreement. She then clicked to the next slide. Exhibit D2. This image was a screenshot of a recent social media post. It showed a photo of Arthur Jenkins shaking hands with a man identified as Marcus Shadow Cole, a known figure in the city's less savory circles, rumored to be involved in debt collection and petty intimidation. The caption beneath the photo read, "Jenkins and Cole. Old friends, still doing business?" The courtroom erupted in hushed gasps and frantic whispers. Mr. Thorne's face was now a mask of profound shock. Ms. Sharma was openly staring, a slow, dawning realization spreading across her features. "My independent inquiry," Judge Vance continued, unwavering, involved scrutinizing public records and cross-referencing information that, while not formally introduced by either counsel during trial, became relevant in light of my concerns regarding Mr. Jenkins's motive. She fixed her gaze directly on Jenkins, who had now visibly paled. "Mr. Jenkins, you testified under oath that you had no known enemies, no ongoing disputes. You presented yourself as a victim of random street violence." The judge then leaned forward, her voice dropping to a low, powerful register that compelled absolute attention. "My investigation revealed that your development company, Jenkins and Associates, has been aggressively pursuing a lucrative city contract for a major urban renewal project in the East Side, a project that has faced significant community opposition due to concerns about gentrification and displacement. One of the most vocal opponents of this project, a key figure rallying community resistance, is Pastor Elias Thorne. And, coincidentally, Mr. Jamal Thompson is Pastor Thorne's mentee, a prominent young voice in that very community." A collective murmur swept through the courtroom. The connection was clear, chilling. "It is my considered opinion," Judge Vance declared, her voice now ringing with authority, "that Mr. Arthur Jenkins had a powerful motive to discredit those opposing his development project, specifically by creating a public spectacle that would demonize a figure closely associated with the opposition. And what better way to achieve this than by fabricating a narrative of being attacked by a young black male from that very community, especially one whose mentor was leading the charge against him?" The silence that followed was deafening. The entire court, including the usually stoic deputies, sat absolutely stunned. Jenkins, his face ashen, tried to speak, but no words came out. "Furthermore," Judge Vance stated, her eyes narrowing as she looked at Jenkins, "my review of police reports regarding the original assault revealed an inconsistency regarding a specific piece of evidence, Mr. Jenkins's wallet. He reported it stolen. However, the responding officer's notes mentioned finding a wallet near the scene, which was later dismissed as irrelevant. I instructed an officer to revisit that specific piece of irrelevant evidence." She paused for dramatic effect. "Inside that wallet, which was never formally entered into evidence, was not just Mr. Jenkins's ID, but also a burner phone and a small, distinctively engraved silver locket. The locket contained a photo of Mr. Jenkins and Marcus Shadow Cole." Gasps erupted. This wasn't just a misidentification, this was an active fabrication, a frame-up. The sheer audacity of it left everyone breathless. Jamal, for the first time in weeks, felt a surge of something he hadn't dared to hope for. Vindication. His eyes met his mother's, and she was openly weeping. But these were tears of stunned relief, of burgeoning hope. Judge Vance's voice, now imbued with a righteous fury, filled the silent room. "This court finds it highly probable, based on this new contextual evidence, that Mr. Arthur Jenkins orchestrated his own assault and attempted to frame Mr. Jamal Thompson, not out of fear, but out of a calculated, malicious intent to silence community opposition and further his business interests." She looked at the jury, then back at Jamal. "Therefore, while respecting the jury's initial verdict based on the information then available, I cannot, in good conscience, allow this injustice to stand. This court must fulfill the true desire of justice, which is to protect the innocent and expose deceit." The words were momentous, unprecedented. The entire court held its breath, waiting for the inevitable power shift, the radical consequence. The courtroom, which moments ago had been a crucible of tension, was now a powder keg, primed to explode. Judge Vance's declaration, "I cannot, in good conscience, allow this injustice to stand," was a seismic event, shattering the established norms of the legal process. Prosecutor Thorne was on his feet, his face a mask of outrage and disbelief. "Your Honor, you cannot simply overturn a jury's verdict based on your own external inquiries. This sets a dangerous precedent. It undermines the entire judicial system." Judge Vance's gaze, usually cool and measured, now burned with an unwavering intensity. She struck her gavel once, sharply. "Mr. Thorne, this court's primary duty is to uphold justice, not to uphold a flawed process. When new information, even if informally discovered, exposes a grave perversion of justice, it is this court's solemn duty to act. The integrity of this institution demands it." She then turned her attention to the silent, ashen-faced figure of Arthur Jenkins. "Mr. Jenkins, you have committed perjury. You have tampered with justice. You have attempted to maliciously frame an innocent young man. These are not minor transgressions." Jenkins, finding his voice, stammered, "Your Honor, this is preposterous. These are baseless accusations. My company, my reputation—" "Your reputation, Mr. Jenkins," Judge Vance interrupted, her voice cutting like ice, "is precisely what you sought to leverage in this scheme, and it is precisely what is now at stake. Furthermore, the presence of a burner phone and your association with Mr. Cole raise immediate and serious questions about the nature of your alleged assault and your conduct leading up to it." She looked at Jamal, who sat frozen, his mind struggling to process the monumental shift in his reality. The weight of the guilty verdict, which had crushed him, was suddenly, miraculously, lifting. He felt a dizzying surge of relief, almost too overwhelming to grasp. "Therefore," Judge Vance declared, her voice ringing with absolute authority, "based on the compelling contextual evidence and the clear indications of malicious intent and perjury by Mr. Arthur Jenkins, this court formally vacates the jury's guilty verdict against Mr. Jamal Thompson." A collective gasp swept through the courtroom, quickly followed by a stunned silence. Ms. Sharma gasped, tears welling in her eyes, as she turned to Jamal, a wide, disbelieving smile breaking across her face. Jamal felt a strange sensation, a mixture of elation and a profound, bone-deep tremor. He was free. "Furthermore," Judge Vance continued, her voice gaining even more gravitas, "this court finds that Mr. Arthur Jenkins has engaged in conduct that constitutes perjury, obstruction of justice, and filing a false police report. I am therefore instructing the District Attorney's Office to immediately initiate a full investigation into Mr. Jenkins for these charges, and for any other crimes that may come to light regarding his association with Mr. Marcus Cole and the alleged assault against him." The implications were staggering. Not only was Jamal acquitted, but his accuser, a powerful real estate mogul, was now facing criminal charges. The power dynamic in the courtroom had been flipped on its head with breathtaking speed and force. Mr. Thorne, though still reeling, finally found his prosecutorial footing. "Your Honor, the District Attorney's Office will, of course, comply with the court's order. However, I must reiterate my strong objection to the method by which this new information was introduced. It undermines the very foundation of our adversarial system." Judge Vance fixed him with a stare that brooked no further argument. "Mr. Thorne, the foundation of justice is truth. When that truth is deliberately obscured, or when a verdict is based on a fabricated narrative, this court will not stand idly by. This is not about undermining a system. It is about protecting its fundamental integrity." She then looked directly at Jamal. "Mr. Thompson, you are hereby discharged. You are free to go." The words, simple yet profound, resonated deep within him. Free. He looked at his mother, who was now openly sobbing, a beautiful, joyous sound. He stood up, his legs feeling a little wobbly. He glanced at Jenkins, who sat slumped, his dreams of vindication and lucrative East Side contracts now crumbling around him. The courtroom doors burst open, and a throng of reporters who had been listening intently to the live feeds surged in. Cameras flashed, microphones were thrust forward. The story had just taken an unimaginable turn, a dramatic twist that would dominate headlines for weeks. As Jamal, guided by a beaming Ms. Sharma, made his way out of the courtroom, a thunderous wave of applause erupted from the public gallery. Pastor Thorne, beaming with pride and relief, rushed forward to embrace Jamal, his strong arms a testament to unwavering support. The East Side community members, who had rallied for him, cheered, their faces alight with a rare victory. Outside, the scene was chaotic. Reporters clamored for a statement. Social media was in meltdown. Justice. For Jenkins had completely evaporated, replaced by Funarsabatkar Judge Vance hero and Vofasser Free Jamal. The narrative had not just shifted, it had performed a complete 180-degree flip. Jenkins, the powerful developer, was now the villain, and Jamal, the accused black teenager, was the symbol of resilience and vindication. But amidst the clamor, Jamal caught sight of Judge Vance, still seated at her bench, her face now etched with a quiet, almost weary satisfaction. Her eyes met his for a moment, and in that fleeting glance, he saw not just a judge, but a human being who had dared to challenge the system, to fight for what was right, even when it meant risking her own reputation and career. She had fulfilled his deepest desire, the desire for truth, for justice, for a future he thought had been snatched away. The aftermath of Judge Vance's unprecedented ruling was nothing short of a legal and media earthquake. The footage of her dramatic declaration, her voice ringing with authority as she dismantled Arthur Jenkins's fabricated story, went viral within minutes. News anchors, legal experts, and social media influencers dissected every word, every gesture. The judge who stood for justice screamed one headline. Courtroom drama, Vance exposes corruption, declared another. For Jamal, the immediate relief was immense, but the transition back to a semblance of normal life was jarring. He was no longer just Jamal Thompson, the quiet kid from the East Side. He was Jamal Thompson, the innocent teen framed by a powerful developer, a living symbol of systemic injustice overcome by judicial courage. His face, once associated with criminality, was now plastered across screens as a testament to resilience. Ms. Anya Sharma, his public defender, was propelled into the national spotlight. Her tireless efforts, though initially overshadowed by the jury's verdict, were now recognized as heroic. She was inundated with interview requests, her phone ringing off the hook with offers for book deals and speaking engagements. She used her newfound platform to advocate for systemic reforms, highlighting the plight of underrepresented youth in the justice system. Jamal's case, she stated in a CNN interview, is a stark reminder that justice is not always blind. Sometimes it takes a brave individual to open its eyes. Arthur Jenkins's world, conversely, imploded. The district attorney's office, under immense public pressure and Judge Vance's direct order, launched a swift and aggressive investigation. Within days, Jenkins was arrested, not for the original assault, which was now deemed a fabrication, but for perjury, obstruction of justice, and filing a false police report. The connection to Marcus Shadow Cole was also vigorously pursued. Cole, sensing the imminent collapse of his operations, attempted to flee the country, but was apprehended at the airport. His interrogation quickly revealed a web of illegal activities, including debt collection using intimidation tactics and a scheme to strong-arm small businesses out of their properties, many of which were then acquired by Jenkins and Associates through shell corporations. The East Side Development Project, which had been the catalyst for Jenkins's frame-up, was immediately put on hold. The city council, facing widespread public outcry, announced a full review of all of Jenkins and Associates' contracts and proposals. Protests, once small and marginalized, now swelled with triumphant community members, celebrating Jamal's freedom and demanding accountability for Jenkins's predatory business practices. Pastor Elias Thorne, Jamal's mentor, became an even more influential voice, leading community discussions and advocating for genuinely equitable development that would benefit, not displace, existing residents. On social media, the tide had completely turned. Justice for Jenkins was a distant, embarrassing memory. Judge Vance hero trended globally, celebrating her bold decision. Free Jamal morphed into Justice for Jamal, with people sharing their own stories of injustice and calling for judicial reform. The digital conversation was no longer about condemning a young black man, but about celebrating a victory against corruption and bias. Jamal's personal life, however, was a whirlwind. He was hailed as a local hero, but the sudden attention was overwhelming. He found solace in his family and in his work at the community center, where the children looked at him with newfound awe and respect. He was invited to speak at local schools, sharing his story of wrongful accusation and ultimate vindication. He spoke not with bitterness, but with a quiet strength, emphasizing the importance of truth and standing up for oneself. One of the most profound ripple effects was on Judge Eleanor Vance herself. Her actions were polarizing. Legal scholars debated the ethical implications of her independent inquiry and whether it truly set a dangerous precedent. Some argued she had overstepped her judicial bounds. Others hailed her as a pioneer, a judge who prioritized substantive justice over rigid proceduralism. Her phone rang constantly with interview requests, but she politely declined them all, maintaining her characteristic stoicism. "My actions speak for themselves," she reportedly told her chambers clerk. However, the political establishment was not entirely pleased. Behind the scenes, there were whispers of a potential ethics investigation, of complaints filed by powerful figures who felt threatened by her audacious move. The very system she had challenged was now subtly pushing back. Judge Vance, though externally calm, knew the storm was far from over for her personally. Yet, public opinion was overwhelmingly in her favor. Petitions supporting her judicial conduct garnered millions of signatures. Legal aid organizations praised her courage. Even within the legal community, many privately admired her conviction, acknowledging that sometimes extraordinary measures were needed to correct extraordinary injustices. A few weeks after the verdict was vacated, Jamal received an unexpected letter. It was from Judge Vance's chambers, a formal invitation to a private meeting. Jamal was nervous but also deeply curious. What could she possibly want to say to him, now that the dust had settled? He went, accompanied by Ms. Sharma, to her chambers, a room usually reserved for hushed legal discussions, not personal encounters. Judge Vance was seated at her large mahogany desk, looking less like a formidable judge and more like a thoughtful, contemplative academic. She gestured for them to sit. "Mr. Thompson," she began, her voice softer than in the courtroom, "I wanted to see you personally, not as a judge, but as someone who bore witness to a profound injustice." Jamal nodded, unsure how to respond. "What I did," she continued, her gaze steady, "was not without risk. But seeing your face, Mr. Thompson, knowing that a young life was about to be irrevocably altered by a lie, it compelled me to act. The system has its flaws, deeply embedded ones, but it also has mechanisms for correction, for self-reformation. Sometimes those mechanisms need a catalyst." She paused, then looked directly at Jamal. "You, Mr. Thompson, were that catalyst. Your quiet dignity throughout that ordeal, your unwavering insistence on your innocence, even when the odds were stacked against you, it spoke volumes." Jamal felt a lump in his throat. He had never expected such a personal acknowledgement from her. "My actions," Judge Vance concluded, "were not just for you. They were for every individual who feels unheard, unseen, and unjustly targeted by a system that often fails them. My desire, Mr. Thompson, was to ensure that in my courtroom, at least, justice would prevail. And I believe it did." She offered a faint, almost imperceptible smile. For the first time, Jamal saw the human behind the gavel, the heart behind the robes. He realized that her act of courage had not only saved his future, but had also reaffirmed his faith, and the faith of many others, in the possibility of true justice. It was a moment of profound, quiet understanding between them, a shared belief in the enduring power of truth. Life after the courtroom drama began to settle into a new, unexpected rhythm for Jamal. The intense media scrutiny eventually waned, replaced by a lingering respect in his community and a quiet celebrity in legal circles. He was still Jamal, but he carried himself with a newfound confidence, a quiet strength forged in the crucible of adversity. His original dreams, once shattered, now began to reform, brighter and more urgent. The offers started coming in. A full scholarship to the local university, contingent on maintaining his excellent academic record, now stood firm. Various community organizations offered him internships and mentorship opportunities. He chose to continue his work at the community center, feeling a strong pull to give back to the place and the people who had stood by him. He also became an informal mentor to other young people navigating difficult circumstances, his story a powerful beacon of hope. Jamal's relationship with his mother, Patricia, deepened immeasurably. They had always been close, but the shared trauma and subsequent triumph forged an unbreakable bond. She was no longer just his fierce protector. She was his co-survivor, his anchor. "You showed them, baby," she'd often say, stroking his hair. "You showed them what you're made of." The legal fallout from Judge Vance's decision continued to unfold. Arthur Jenkins and Marcus Cole were formally indicted on multiple felony counts. The trial, when it eventually came, was another media circus. With Judge Vance's initial findings setting the stage, and with exhaustive follow-up investigations by the district attorney, the evidence against Jenkins and Cole was overwhelming. They were both found guilty. Jenkins received a lengthy prison sentence, his real estate empire crumbling, his name synonymous with deceit. Cole also received significant jail time, effectively dismantling his criminal network. The East Side Development Project remained stalled. The community, empowered by their victory, organized a series of town hall meetings, demanding a transparent and equitable process for urban renewal. Jamal, alongside Pastor Thorne, often spoke at these meetings, advocating for projects that genuinely served the community's needs, not just corporate greed. His articulate arguments, combined with his personal story, carried immense weight. Judge Eleanor Vance, despite the initial whispers of an ethics investigation, emerged from the controversy with her reputation largely enhanced. While some legal purists still debated her methods, the overwhelming public support and the clear vindication of Jamal cemented her status as a judge of profound courage and moral conviction. She continued her judicial duties with her usual rigorous adherence to the law, but now, perhaps, with an even deeper appreciation for its human impact. She became a quiet champion for judicial reform, advocating for greater discretion in certain cases and for mechanisms to address systemic biases. The ripple effect extended beyond the immediate players. The local police department initiated a review of its investigative protocols, particularly regarding victim testimony and the handling of evidence, following the revelations of the burner phone and Jenkins's false report. The district attorney's office also faced internal pressure to reevaluate how cases involving vulnerable populations were prosecuted. The city as a whole began a broader conversation about racial bias in its institutions. One day, while volunteering at the community center, Jamal received a call from Ms. Sharma. "Jamal," she said, her voice brimming with excitement, "I just got off the phone with the university. They're establishing a new scholarship in your name, the Jamal Thompson Justice Scholarship, for students from underserved communities pursuing legal or social justice studies." Jamal was speechless. A scholarship in his name. It was an honor, a powerful symbol that his ordeal had not been in vain, that it had paved the way for others. He thought back to that moment in the courtroom, the deafening silence, the crushing weight of the guilty verdict. He remembered the fear, the feeling of his future slipping away. And then, Judge Vance's voice, cutting through the despair, challenging the narrative, revealing the truth. She had taken an immense risk, not for personal gain, but for justice. He realized then that his story was more than just his own. It was a story of systemic flaws, of individual courage, of community solidarity, and the enduring power of truth. It was a testament to the idea that even when the system seems rigged, there are still individuals willing to fight for what is right, to challenge the status quo, and to ensure that justice, however elusive, can ultimately prevail. He had gone from being a victim of injustice to a symbol of hope, a living embodiment of resilience. Years passed, bringing with them a steady current of change that began with the powerful catalyst of Jamal's case. He enrolled in the university, excelling in his engineering studies, but never forgetting the winding path that led him there. He found a balance between his academic pursuits and his passion for community advocacy, often speaking at events, sharing his story with clarity and conviction. He became a board member for Voices for Justice, the very organization that had initially championed his cause. The Jamal Thompson Justice Scholarship thrived, supporting numerous students from underserved communities, many of whom were inspired by Jamal's journey to pursue careers in law, social work, and public service. He actively mentored these scholars, offering not just financial support, but also lived experience and unwavering encouragement. The East Side community, empowered by their victory against Jenkins, successfully pushed for a new, community-led urban development plan. Jamal, using his burgeoning engineering knowledge, contributed to the discussions, advocating for sustainable, affordable housing and green spaces that truly served the existing residents. The project, named the Phoenix Initiative, became a national model for equitable development, a testament to the power of organized community action. Judge Eleanor Vance, despite the initial political headwinds, continued her distinguished career, becoming a quiet legend within the legal community. She rarely spoke publicly about the Thompson case, but her rulings became even more incisive, her questions from the bench more probing, particularly in cases involving vulnerable defendants or complex business dealings. Her actions had opened a door, albeit subtly, for other judges to consider broader ethical implications beyond strict procedural adherence, emboldening a new generation of jurists to prioritize substantive justice. She eventually retired from the bench, leaving behind a legacy of courage and integrity. Ms. Anya Sharma, Jamal's tenacious public defender, leveraged her newfound prominence to establish her own non-profit legal firm, the Thompson Justice Initiative, dedicated to providing pro bono legal services for individuals from marginalized communities facing wrongful accusations. She built a team of passionate lawyers, inspired by her commitment and the sheer injustice of Jamal's case. The firm quickly gained a reputation for taking on difficult cases, often succeeding where others had failed, becoming a powerful force for change in the legal landscape. Arthur Jenkins and Marcus Cole served their sentences. Jenkins, stripped of his wealth and reputation, became a cautionary tale in the business world, a stark example of corporate greed and moral bankruptcy. Cole's criminal network was effectively dismantled, leading to a safer environment in the parts of the city he once preyed upon. Their downfall sent a clear message: even the powerful could be held accountable. Social media, while fleeting in its attention, occasionally revisited Jamal's story, especially when new legal reforms or community initiatives were announced. It served as a reminder that digital conversations, while often volatile, could also be a potent force for exposing truth and mobilizing support. Jamal's little sister, Maya, now a confident young woman, pursued a career in journalism, driven by a fierce desire to uncover truth and give voice to the voiceless. She often interviewed Jamal for her articles, chronicling the ongoing fight for justice and the positive changes spurred by his experience. Their bond, too, remained unbreakable, a testament to family resilience. One crisp autumn evening, Jamal, now a successful civil engineer, stood overlooking the newly revitalized East Side Park, part of the Phoenix Initiative. The park, once a neglected patch of land, was now vibrant with children playing, families picnicking, and older residents enjoying the serenity. He saw a group of young people gathered near a mural depicting community heroes, one of whom was a stylized portrait of Judge Vance, her hand holding scales of justice, and another, subtly, of a determined young man. He felt a profound sense of gratitude and purpose. His life, which had teetered on the brink of despair, had been transformed into a platform for positive change. He had learned that true justice wasn't just about verdicts. It was about the continuous effort to dismantle systemic barriers, to amplify marginalized voices, and to build a more equitable world. He thought of Judge Vance's quiet courage, Ms. Sharma's unwavering dedication, Pastor Thorne's community leadership, and his mother's indomitable love. He realized that the story wasn't just about one judge fulfilling the desire of one black teen. It was about how that single act of courage had ignited a chain reaction, planting seeds of change that were now blossoming across the city. The seeds of change, once tiny and fragile, had taken root, growing into a forest of hope and renewed possibility. The years spun into a decade, and the echoes of that fateful day in courtroom 3B continued to resonate, shaping lives and institutions. Jamal Thompson, now in his late 20s, had become a highly respected civil engineer, specializing in urban infrastructure projects with a focus on sustainable and equitable development. He rarely spoke of the trial publicly anymore, his actions and contributions speaking louder than words. He sat on multiple city planning committees, ensuring that the mistakes of the past, like the predatory schemes of Arthur Jenkins, would not be repeated. His voice, once silenced by accusation, was now a powerful, informed force in shaping the city's future. The Jamal Thompson Justice Scholarship had grown into a prestigious national award, attracting applicants from across the country. Jamal personally met with each cohort of scholars, sharing his experiences not as a victim, but as a survivor and a catalyst for change. He emphasized the importance of integrity, persistence, and the courage to challenge injustice, no matter the odds. His story became a foundational text in many social justice curricula, inspiring countless students. Ms. Anya Sharma's Thompson Justice Initiative had expanded, opening offices in several major cities. It was now a formidable force in pro bono legal defense, winning landmark cases that challenged systemic biases in policing and sentencing. She was often quoted in legal journals and served on national commissions for judicial reform. She and Jamal remained close, their professional partnership rooted in a profound personal respect and shared commitment to justice. Judge Eleanor Vance, now in her well-deserved retirement, lived a quiet life, but her legacy continued to inspire. Legal academies held symposia on the Vance Doctrine, debating the delicate balance between judicial independence and procedural integrity. While never advocating for reckless disregard of protocol, Her case became a benchmark for judges contemplating how far they could and should go to prevent a clear miscarriage of justice. She occasionally received letters from young law students, thanking her for her courage, reminding her that her actions had indeed made a lasting difference. The East Side, thanks to the Phoenix Initiative, was transformed. It was a vibrant, thriving community, a testament to genuine urban renewal. Affordable housing flourished, new schools and community centers provided opportunities, and local businesses thrived. The park, which Jamal helped design, became a symbol of resilience, its central fountain inscribed with a quote from Pastor Elias Thorne: "From the ashes of injustice, a community rises." Pastor Thorne himself continued his tireless work, a revered elder statesman in the ongoing fight for social equity. Arthur Jenkins and Marcus Cole faded into obscurity after serving their time, their names permanently stained by their crimes. Their downfall served as a stark reminder of the accountability that could and should befall those who abused their power. Jamal's mother, Patricia, continued to be his biggest supporter, her early fears replaced by immense pride. She often volunteered at the community center, sharing her story of unwavering faith in her son, offering comfort and wisdom to other parents navigating difficult circumstances. Maya, his sister, had become an award-winning investigative journalist, her articles often exposing corruption and advocating for systemic change, a direct continuation of the fight for truth ignited by her brother's trial. One evening, Jamal found himself at a gala celebrating the 10th anniversary of the Phoenix Initiative. He stood on stage, looking out at a sea of familiar and new faces, community members, city officials, young scholars from his scholarship program. He felt a deep sense of peace, a quiet joy. 10 years ago, he began, his voice calm and resonant, I stood in a courtroom, accused of a crime I did not commit. My future, my very identity, was on trial. It was a moment of profound despair. He paused, scanning the faces in the room. But in that moment, in that silence, a single act of courage, a single pursuit of truth, changed everything. A judge, against all odds, chose to look beyond the presented narrative, to seek the deeper truth. And in doing so, she didn't just save my life, she ignited a movement. He continued. What we see around us today, this thriving community, these opportunities, these renewed hopes, this is the legacy of that moment. It's a legacy that reminds us that justice is not a singular event. It is an ongoing journey. It requires vigilance, compassion, and the unwavering belief that truth, however hidden, will always find its way to light. He ended his speech, looking directly at the young scholars in the audience. To all of you, remember this. Your voice matters, your story matters, and your pursuit of justice, no matter how small or how grand, has the power to create ripple effects that can change the world. Never stop fighting for what is right. As he stepped off the stage, a wave of applause and cheers washed over him. He knew that the story of the judge who fulfilled the desire of a black teen was not just a dramatic tale of an overturned verdict. It was a powerful, enduring narrative about resilience in the face of injustice, the profound impact of individual courage, and the unwavering, transformative power of truth. It was a story that defined his life, and in turn, helped to redefine justice for an entire community. Jamal Thompson's journey, from wrongful accusation to triumphant vindication, stands as a powerful testament to resilience and the profound impact of individual courage. Judge Eleanor Vance's unprecedented decision to challenge a flawed verdict not only saved a young man's future, but ignited a chain reaction of change, exposing corruption and fostering true community empowerment. This story reminds us that even against formidable odds, truth can prevail, and justice, when championed with conviction, can redefine destinies. Like, share, and subscribe to hear more stories of resilience and the relentless pursuit of justice that shape our world.